Thank you so much for your graciousness in hosting us today. I have enjoyed all of the speakers so far, people that I've admired from afar, getting to meet some of them. And so this afternoon's panel is going to be very lively. We're going to have audience participation very early on. So you're going to get, this is a lot more discussion than anything else. But I'd like to welcome, before I even welcome the panelists, I want to tell you a little bit about Independent Women's Forum. We are a nonprofit organization in DC, similar to a think tank that you have where we put out policies. We're speaking to center-right, center-left women. And one of our biggest mottos for the longest time is all issues are women's issues. We're not simply defined by our reproductive organs. Women are business women. Women are mothers, they're caregivers. Women are leading CEOs. Women are stay-at-home. Women run the gamut. And so they care about tax policy just like they care about children and education in schools. And that is why we have a stellar roster of brilliant women who have worked in and out of administrations and government in the nonprofit sector, who analyze policy and figure out what does it mean to you and me. And we take it the next step further, which is what can I do about it? What can you do about it? So I'm excited to work for this organization. I started as a fellow just writing some blog posts. Now they have me up here doing things like this for Carol. But we also have our educational organization is a C3 organization that you're more than welcome to support. And if you look on your tables, you should have a handout that looks something like this. There should be two here. This is our Working for Women report, which is brand new, looking at how can we make sure government is not an impediment to women who want to be in the workforce and the workplace, and all of the choices that they get to make. But really the subject of today's panel discussion is about this flyer that you see here. We are going to be talking about protecting women, women's spaces, protecting women's sports, but it's beyond just women's sports. And I know you're thinking about your daughters, your granddaughters, you're thinking about the males in bathrooms and locker rooms with your daughters and your granddaughters. And by the way, thank God I have 3 boys. Because if I had a girl, I don't know, I would pull my hair out right now for fear about what our daughters and granddaughters are facing. But it's beyond that. Protecting women's spaces, prisons, shelters, all the places where women should be able to be by themselves with each other, away from the predators and away from the people who will infiltrate for nefarious purposes, how those spaces have now been usurped and taken over. So I'm excited to welcome my panel today and just frame the conversation with this response. I'm not a biologist. So you can tell me what the question was. Your Senator, Marsha Blackburn, asked Ketanji Brown Jackson, can you just define a woman? This should be a simple question, but that was her response. And I think for a lot of people who heard the next Supreme Court justice say, I am not a biologist, to the question of, what is a woman? Can you define a woman? It was a eureka moment for how far this movement has come in America, to how far along these issues have been brewing. But if you're like me, I love pop culture, and I love to watch TV, like Lifetime and some of those different channels. Back in 2000, and I think it was 2007, I saw a young girl who was on television called I Am Jazz. And I didn't understand the show at the time. Going back to 2007, 2008. That was when we were starting to see this idea of transgenderism moving into pop culture. That's been a while ago. But we can go back to the 70s to see where transgender athletes have been moving into women's sports. What I think is new, and I think feels very concerning for so many of us, is how it feels like a sudden onslaught. Unprepared so many people have felt for what has been troubling for years now. So our focus, I mean, you guys read, I know you're tapped in. We're not going to focus on the stories of what's happening. We're going to tell you what is being done to fight back against it, and how organizations like Independent Women's Forum, Independent Women's Voice, which is our C4 organization, our sister organization, Independent Women's Legal Center, which is the one and only legal center for women from a right of center perspective, how we're using the different levers of power, whether it's legislative or judicial, to fight back against this onslaught. and then we'll talk a little bit about economic issues as well. So I'm going to welcome up my panel at this point. First and foremost, I know you've seen her on Fox News. Actually, all of our ladies, including myself, are regulars on the TV circuit. But Paula Scanlan is an ambassador with Independent Women's Forum and Independent Women's Voice, where she continues her mission of defending women's single-sex spaces and standing up for the right to free speech. Paula graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, where she was a swimmer on a swim team with a famous person. She broke her silence in 2028 on her experience as a teammate of Leah Thompson. And if you don't know, Leah Thompson was not born a female. Her efforts, Paula's efforts for her college administration, based on her efforts of her college's administration and student body to silence her and suppress her right to speech, frankly, I think has made her an even stronger supporter and advocate and voice for this issue. So Paula, please come join me on stage. Next up, we have Mailman. She's the director of our Independent Women's Law Center. May is a former legal advisor to President Donald J. Trump, where she advised on a wide range of policies including healthcare, immigration, and social issues. While at the White House, she also worked in the office of the Chief of Staff and the Staff's Secretary Office. May, please join us. And by the way, she is 32 years old. She is a champion. And then Carol also previewed Michelle Parker. So Michelle is a retained executive headhunter in the national chapter and leader for Independent Women's Network, which is another one of our organizations. Michelle's advocacy work is in support of preserving equal rights and opportunities for women and girls in athletics and in higher education. So the way today's panel is going to go, both Paula and May will provide a few remarks, and then we're going to, and as well, Michelle will provide one or two remarks, and then we're going to really have a discussion here. I have a lot of questions, and then we're going to open it up with plenty, ample time for you to ask questions of these ladies. Think about, what can I do? Think about, what do I need to be armed with? What do I need to ask these ladies so that I can take back with me to my friend circles? Because believe it or not, this issue is infiltrating your friend circles, your communities, and we just need to have the tools and the weapons to fight back. So let me join you guys right up front. But Paula, please come.
Thank you all for being here. I know that we're sort of at the end, so I appreciate everyone sticking around. And obviously, big thanks to Carol Swain here. I've been a huge fan, so when I got the notice that you wanted me here, I said, does she know who I am? So that was really exciting. I'm only 23, so it is kind of interesting to be speaking to people who, not to age anyone, but I think I'm on the other side. So it just means the world to do that, and it means the world to have perspective and to have things I can be sharing with people that are much older than me. I mean, generally speaking, and I know this, I've learned so much from my parents, my grandparents. Older people generally are more knowledgeable. And it's crazy that I've gone through an experience that can teach me things, can teach things to people that are younger than me as well, but also it can teach people who are older, who aren't realizing what's happening in colleges. My parents went to the University of Pennsylvania as well, and they were shocked that my experience at Penn, a university that they once loved so much, was very different from their experience. And my brother graduated 8 years before me, or 7 years before me, and his experience was even much different than mine. So it's really important to really talk about what's happening in these colleges, what's happening in these institutions, and to hear that from students who have just graduated like myself, or even kids who are still there. So I'm going to get into a little bit of that. So it starts when I was young. I swam for my entire life, pretty much. I started competitively swimming at age 8, and by late middle school, I was dedicating 20 hours a week. I was going to meets on the weekend. I was giving up Christmas holidays, social events with friends, you name it. My goal was swimming Division I. But as a child, I struggled with dyslexia, and so I was not the best student. But my brother, who's 8 years older than me, he was a really strong student, so swimming was the outlet that gave me something to be my own, something that could be mine, something that I didn't have to worry about my brother doing, and eventually I realized it could actually help me get into college. So when the opportunity came around for me to go to colleges, and I was in the time range of being able to swim at an Ivy League school, I was ecstatic to have the opportunity to swim at the University of Pennsylvania. And I looked at the Ivy Leagues as something that was so elite and so powerful, and it would set me up for the rest of my life, and I'm going to get a great education, and I'm going to be superior to other people who didn't get these opportunities. I was so wrong for thinking that. And that's really what opened my eyes, obviously being on the swim team, which I will get into in a moment. But the Ivy League institutions are not better than others. In fact, they're worse because the students who leave them are incredibly indoctrinated. They don't know what a man is or a woman is. They think that everyone is racist. I studied engineering in college, and I had to take a mandatory class that taught us every single piece of code or math or algorithm that's written by a white person is racist inherently. And it was, what am I learning here? So obviously I ended up at the University of Pennsylvania, and my freshman year was like pretty normal. Obviously the classic, them teaching you things like everyone's racist, but to be expected. But in the fall of 2019, when I was a sophomore, we had a team meeting. And our coach separated the men's and the women's teams, and the men went first, and then the women went. And we were about to start the meeting, and I noticed a member of the men's team named Will Thomas was waiting back. And I said, I wonder why he's here. This is supposed to be a women's team meeting. And our coach goes to start the meeting and says, Will, this is your meeting. You have the room. And I said, that's bizarre. Why is a men's team leading a women's team meeting? And he looked us all in the face, and he said, I am transgender. Please refer to me with she, her pronouns, and I will be joining your team next season. That was it. There was no Q&A, there was no questions, and I'm sitting there on the verge of laughing because I thought this was a practical joke, because how could a 6'4" tall man say he wants to identify as a woman and compete on the women's team? And I looked around, trying to hold back laughter, and I noticed that none of my teammates were doing the same. They were clapping, they were applauding, they were saying, I'm so proud of you, you're being your authentic and true self, this is beautiful, thank you for coming out to us, we can't wait to bring you into the women's team and respect your identity. And I was in shock. And at this moment, this brought me into a huge, rabbit hole of, okay, what is this policy that allowed this? And why is this happening? And so I looked it up, and it turns out the NCAA had a policy, and it was a pamphlet of stories of people who identified as transgender and how it was so important for them to be included in sports. And in this policy handbook, it said, you take testosterone suppressant for 1 year, and you are enough to be a woman, and you can compete on any women's swim team or any women's sports team in the entire country for that matter. And that to me, I was shocked. But I said, you know what? It's okay. The Ivy League will step in. The University of Pennsylvania will step in. The NCAA will realize this is very outdated, and they will step in. And of course, none of that happened. So it ended up being 2 years later. So the Ivy League also decided to cancel all sports in the 2020 to 2021 season, again, because they thought they were morally superior, and they said, if we don't have sports, we're not going to be killing old people because of COVID, which every other sports league in the country decided that they were going to have sports, we just didn't for some reason. So 2 years later, now in the fall of 2021, Thomas is on our team, like anybody else. He has a locker in the locker room next to everybody else, and there's not a single discussion on whether or not we were comfortable undressing with him. He was just placed there. And actually a really, really good friend of mine got the locker next to him. And she was so appalled by it, she went to her coach and he said, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. So what she did is she went outside, there's a single stall family handicapped bathroom, if you see one of those. She changed in that every single day, every practice for the entire season. And originally, actually, 2 years before, we were told that Thomas was going to be changing there. But instead, it's us women that have to conform. And we have to do what we need to do to be comfortable instead of being made comfortable by our university. And as the season went on, I watched Thomas beat out every girl at every school we raced. I watched him set team records in every event. I watched him take a spot from a girl at every travel meet that he went to. And it was really heartbreaking because I saw the tears of the girls on my team and on the other teams that had to do this. But the thing is that even though you could see that behind the scenes, if you looked closely, on paper, everybody was clapping. Everybody was cheering. Everyone was talking about how it was this amazing thing. People were saying that our team is so progressive. There were people across the university that were like, you guys are part of making history. if history and a good thing is having a man dominate women on women's sports teams, I don't want to be part of history. So Thomas continued to smash records, and the university eventually realized they needed to address us because media was starting to get wind of the situations. And I also was talking very vocally to people independently about how wrong this was, and I would have conversations with my teammates, and I would say, this is really wrong, and they would agree, and they would have varying different degrees of, we should not have him compete, or we should have his times not count, or he shouldn't be on the team at all. But most people agreed that it was wrong to some extent. And the university was sort of kind of catching wind of that. So they sit us down for a mandatory team meeting, and at this point, Thomas had already smashed multiple team records. And they told us, you will not speak to the media. If you speak to the media, you will regret it, and this will follow you for the rest of your life. You will never be able to get a job. Anytime anybody searches you up, they will find this about you, and you will be unemployable. They also told us that they were here to make us okay with the situation. They told us that Leah being on the team was a non-negotiable, and they said, oh, one last thing, if you continue to object, here's a number for psychological services. Please go see them. And that, to me, was, they were trying to re-educate us, and at this point, I'm thinking to myself, do I need a therapist? Do I need to talk to somebody? Am I just a horrible person for objecting to undressing with a man 18 times every single week? Am I a horrible person for saying that men shouldn't compete in women's sports? And to put it into perspective, Thomas was the tallest person on both the men's and the women's teams. He was taller than the men. And we're sitting here clapping that he's competing on a women's team. So as this went on, and after that meeting, a lot of my teammates were afraid of talking about it even amongst ourselves. I had teammates I would previously have conversations with about how unfair they thought it was, and after that meeting they said, no, we have to be on board, this is amazing. And everybody was silent. There was complete silence. And I struggled with this. I was doing anonymous interviews with the media a little bit, trying to talk to people, but I was scared because I didn't want to lose my job that I worked so hard to get. I don't want to be that person who rocked the boat. I was expecting, hopefully, maybe the Ivy League would catch on, the NCAA would step in. And of course, none of those people stepped in, even as Thomas continued to smash records. And eventually when Thomas went on to win an NCAA championship title, which was the first in our entire team history, because the Ivy League is not known for producing NCAA champions. It is very true. And we had one for the first time ever. So it was this insane situation, and eventually I decided to try and write an op-ed for the school newspaper. And it was just simply discussing science, and the science that everybody in the world used to know maybe only 15 years before. That a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and men are stronger than women, and I compared times from Olympians and in various different sports. I cited research that showed how even with a year of testosterone suppressant, men are still stronger than women and will still beat them in sports. And I didn't bash Leah, I just talked about the science. I criticized the NCAA's failed policy that allowed this to happen. And they, put a lot of round of edits, they suppressed a lot of the words I was using, they really watered it down, and finally it was acceptable to be published. And it was so watered down at this point that I said anything to get the opposite opinion out there. And we published the piece, and within an hour, it was pulled off the website, retracted with no notice to anyone, not myself, not the readers. And the editor I was working with ghosted me. He refused to respond to any of my messages, and finally 2 weeks later, he told me that more than half the staff was threatening to quit over it being up because they couldn't stand by student-accepted transphobia, or whatever that means. So at this point, it was when I realized not only is this a problem of fairness in women's sports, but it goes a lot deeper, that they want to silence anyone who dissents, and they want us to be quiet. And I was scared for a very long time, and I was quiet for a very long time, but eventually, a year after graduating, I worked a normal corporate job in New York City. I realized, how can I expect other people to change the rules? How can I expect other people to stand up for me if I'm not willing to stand up for myself? And that is really what motivated and I eventually found the wonderful organization, Independent Women's Forum. These ladies I've worked with very closely, and they are amazing, and it's really given me a support network that I didn't have on my swim team, because even though silently, behind closed doors, my teammates objected, none of them have spoken out about this. None of them want to be smeared with the labels of being transphobic or being a bigot or whatever they might throw at us. And I used to be scared of those things, but I realize now that you need to get out there and do it. You need to be the people that do it. And you need to stand up for what you know is right. And I know there's been a lot of different topics that I've talked about and things that are a lot heavier and harder. But this one should not be controversial. Men and women are different. God made both men and women to complement each other, and both are needed in society. Both are needed in thriving societies. And to deny that is just denying basic truth and basic reality. And I was quiet and I was silent, and I know that I feel guilty for that, I really do, but I mean, I forgive myself for it because, you can only do what you can do. But I encourage everyone on this issue, on any issue, to be vocal, to be loud, to spread truth, because this issue is the truth. And this is not a right or a left issue. This is a right or a wrong issue, and the right thing is to know the difference between men and women, and to know that we can't allow what happened to my swim team to happen to anybody else. And so that's what I work so hard daily to fight for. And I know a lot of you guys in this room also believe those things, so just thank you to everyone, and I just encourage everyone to continue to be vocal on every issue, on any issue, and I appreciate the support.
Great that Paula at 23 years old is smarter than the entire Biden administration. A lot of degrees in that administration. So my name is Mailman. I'm the director of the Independent Women's Law Center, and as Paula mentioned, I'm also 34 weeks pregnant, but it would not be a conservative conference without a pregnant lady in heels. So you're welcome. But otherwise, this whole thing would have to disband. And Heather had talked about my heels. Well, if you work in the Trump White House for 4 years with Melania and Onwuka, you're wearing heels to an event. You can't let someone be 7 feet tall and you're 5'3". It's like not you can't function in that sort of society. So, as you're all now very well aware, women's sports and women's spaces are under attack. And although we hear about this on a daily basis now, the assault has been a long time coming. And we talked about Jazz Jennings, and one of the questions earlier was about storytelling. Storytelling is super powerful. Once you hear about Jazz Jennings, then all of a sudden, in 2010, the NCAA adopted its testosterone suppression makes you a woman policy. Also in 2010, the LPGA dropped its female-born requirement in response to a lawsuit, an individual telling that individual's story. In 2016, Obama wrote a threatening letter to all of the schools telling them that they needed to allow transgender access to bathrooms, to locker rooms, and to use the quote-unquote proper pronouns. So now we've got storytelling on the other side. Thanks to Riley Gaines, thanks to Paula Scanlan, our legislators have started protecting women. Currently, state laws and regulations in 25 states provide that in schools, women's sports teams are for women. But that's not the end of the road. So in 4 of those states, challengers have successfully blocked the law while the litigation is ongoing. The challengers say that the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause demands an end to women's sports, or alternatively, that Title IX demands an end to women's sports, which is like extra bizarre. But courts have fought it. The Supreme Court has had the opportunity to weigh in the West Virginia case, but they have failed to do so. Plus, even if the good guys win in these particular cases, that's just about sports. There are still lingering questions about state authority over private organizations, including that private organizations have a First Amendment right to speak and be as crazy as they want to be, meaning the NCAA and individual sports bodies have a tremendous amount of leeway here. Plus, we're just talking about 25 states, and those aren't a lot of the big ones. So what do we do now? And I have a few suggestions. So one is women who care about women need to be in the courts, asking those courts to enforce existing protections on the books that defend women. At IWF, we are continuing to fight the Biden administration's attempt to misapply Title IX. The Biden administration has 2 proposed rules coming out in the coming months, so very, very soon, that would do a couple of things. One, they would say that discrimination on the basis of sex, which is illegal in any education program, equals discrimination on the basis of gender identity. And 2, say that women's sports specifically should be on the basis of gender identity unless the school can prove a really, really good reason for one individual in one sport why you could have a sex-based policy. So this is the end of single-sex spaces in education programs. And that doesn't mean schools. 4-H takes federal money. Like, this is nationwide what Title IX would apply to. Biden's proposal is completely at odds with Title IX, meaning he has no legal authority to do it. Title IX, although it prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, it recognizes that providing equal opportunity for the sexes means recognizing the inherent differences between the sexes. So people like to say, oh, non-discrimination on the basis of sex, you've got to treat everybody exactly the same. No. This is not the race context, this is the sex context. That means that you have to treat people according to what would give them an equal opportunity. And for sports, that means separate sports. Second, we need to get a grip on the English language. I heard the word gender up here yesterday, but we have to stop saying gender. The left has used the idea of gender and its association with societal norms, like the color pink, wearing heels, wearing dresses, to say that because these types of gender ideas are a little bit flimsy, therefore sex is flimsy as well. And so we have to, when we're talking about men or women, use the word sex, even if it's awkward, even if it's uncomfortable. So if somebody wants to ask me if my baby is a boy or a girl, please do not ask me if this is what the gender of my child is. We need to start saying sex, because we have seen in court the infiltration of the left by using these ideas of, gender roles, gender norms, gender stereotypes to mean that sex doesn't mean anything either. So for our part, Independent Women's Forum is defining and protecting women in state law. It matters little whether a state protects women's sports or protects women's prisons, protects women's scholarships, if you don't know what a woman is. And judges and bureaucrats can just make that up. We've seen that. I'm fighting a case currently where Kappa Kappa Gamma's bylaws say that all new members shall be a woman, and a Reagan appointee, conservative 87-year-old judge said he does not know what a woman is, and so Kappa can make it up however they want. So this is not a liberal issue, this is like a crazy person issue. So we define woman to mean that somebody has their reproductive system basically set up to produce ova, not sperm. This is how the species perpetuates itself, so this should be very basic. I'm also not a biologist, though, so I have to investigate first. And finally, we need to persuade and educate. So IWF, as you've seen on your table, publishes and updates a comprehensive competition report that not only summarizes the state of the law, but it gives specific examples of how the male advantage is incompatible with women's sports. Everything from lung capacity to wingspan to bone structure, and even considering testosterone suppression. When we say testosterone suppression, the suppression levels are still 5 to 7 times what a woman, if a woman had that much testosterone, she would be banned from the sport for doping testosterone and just looking very scary. So, but this competition report enables legislators, litigators, and women who are trying to protect their sports, because this is happening everywhere. They have an online resource that they can go to and they can show and they can say, here are the differences. And we have all sorts of resources like that are sports specific, showing where there's a male advantage and how much that male advantage is. But ultimately, we can't just rely on public opinion, because after all, 70% plus of Americans agree with me on this issue. It depends instead on bravery. It is the easy thing to do to let women's opportunities disappear and the mental health of our nation spiral downward and decline. But it's not the right thing to do. Being brave and standing for the truth is something that all of us can do and that all of us must do.
Those are tough acts to follow. So we launched our Nashville Independent Women's Network chapter right after Women's Bill of Rights inspired legislation was passed in our state this June. And immediately following our launch, we had the opportunity to partner with the Inga Thompson Foundation in organizing a rally, protest, and press conference at the UCI National Cycling event in Knoxville, Tennessee. And this event was shortly after male cyclist Austin Killips became the first trans-identified male to win an official UCI stage event by a whopping 5 minutes. Yes. And I'll tell you, I didn't know what to expect in terms of the reception we'd received when we went to Knoxville. I thought that it could be likely that we'd be met with counter-protesters that had happened in the past at other cycling events. Cycling is a pretty liberal sport. There's a lot of people who are on the left who participate in the sport. But I'll tell you, I was quite surprised to find that nearly everyone who we encountered was on our side of this issue. In fact, we even had parents and family members of some of the most elite and top competitors in the women's division come up to us and thank us for what we were doing and share with us that they were being silenced by their sponsors and by their team managers. There was very few people that voiced opposition. Unfortunately, there were a few elite under 23-year-old women who were on the other side of this issue, and a few crazy male leftists, but aside from that, everybody was on our side. Now the good news is that after this event, the UCI changed their rules, at least in the elite category, to eliminate male competitors who'd gone through male puberty. So I think, what that story shows is a few things. First of all, we've gotten a lot of bad news, I think, over the course of the past several hours, that there is a war on truth. What I found is that this is an issue that truly does cut through the leftist propaganda. In our advocacy work, I have met women and men from all edges of the political spectrum who agree with us on this issue and who have become single issue voters on this issue, including lesbian Marxists, self-avowed Marxists. And I think it makes a big impact when you see your daughter compete against a 6'4" male and be allowed to go into their dressing room and then watch every single congressperson vote in opposition of a law that would have protected against that. So what I'm here to say is that I do think that this is a winning issue for conservatives. It's a winning issue because we can see the facts right in front of us. And as May shared with us, the most recent Gallup poll showed that 70% of Americans agree with us on this. I would argue that even more agree with us, and that polling has improved since the initial polling was done. Wasn't it 64% or 60% initially?
But I think for a 2-year gap, a 7% increase.
Yeah. So this is an issue where I think that, yes, the left is going to call you a transphobe. The left is going to call you every ad hominem because they know that the truth and the facts are on our side and it's blatantly obvious. So I'll echo what everybody else has said. I would really encourage you to not be shy and standing up in your circles, which I don't think I need to tell this room that, but to speak out for the truth and not be afraid of what the other side will say about you because they know that you're right.
I'm going to start with Paula on the end. So you are closest to the college experience right now, and you shared in your comments that behind the scenes, a lot of your teammates were very much supportive, but their speech was chilled. They could not be public about their support. Do you think that a majority of college female athletes in general agree with you and agree with your teammates, or do you think that a lot of these young women do actually embrace this idea of trans athletes on their teams competing is fair?
Sorry, this is work. Okay, cool. Yes, I think most female athletes, and not just athletes, I think people in the world, agree that men should not compete in women's sports. The issue we have is that a small group of radicals believe that it's fair and they should, and everyone else is silent. So it makes us feel like our voices aren't as common, and it makes us feel like we are the outsider for having this opinion. But in reality, it's most people agree, most people are just silent. And that's what I found with a lot of female athletes, not just on my team. I mean, a few girls have reached out to me on my own team, but just around the world, people will just message me and they'll say, hey, I really support you and I love what you're doing, but I'm scared and I'm not going to speak about this publicly. And that's really what makes us feel like we're losing on this issue, but in reality, it's, I would say 80% at least of Americans agree that this is wrong.
Well, and I think the good thing that IWF offers, we kind of touched on it, is we are building out a storytelling capability, meaning that on a variety of issues, economic issues to labor issues, and we call these cultural issues, we are looking for people, regular people who are actually harmed by these policies, by these agendas, to be able to give them a platform to amplify their voices and push them out. For example, we have a series of detransitioners, women who transitioned into as males and then are living with the negative repercussions, and their stories are graphic and horrid, but they need to get out there. So I'm putting a plug in for IWF, but Paula, I'm going to give you a second question. Talk about the administrations. These college administrators, what was their response to you? You mentioned that it was pretty much like a sit up, be quiet, shut up, and listen, but generally, do we see any changes in administrations towards these policies now that people are starting to push back?
Yeah, honestly, a lot of them have doubled down on these policies. I'll give you just a brief example of something that happened while I was on the team. So during January of my senior year, Omicron COVID variant came out, and they started to ban people from coming to meets. And it was actually our senior day meet. So I wanted my parents to be able to be there, I wanted my brother to be able to come. And they told us that each person could only have 2 tickets to come to the meet. And I said, okay, that's interesting, whatever. I show up. The university had sold out the entire top part of the stands to media and sold media passes because they loved the publicity. They loved having media people coming over to these events and to our meets and taking pictures of us in our swimsuits. They loved it. They continued to highlight Thomas's achievements, quote-unquote achievements, on our social media pages. They posted post after post congratulating him on being the fastest women's swimmer in the program history. And they loved it. They ate it up because it gave them the validation from that small radical group that I was talking about, that they were morally superior to everybody else, that they were in this advanced and progress thing, and in the future, trans people are going to be included in every women's sports team. And so I have very low hopes for the administrations of these universities to change. I think, honestly, they needed a full overhaul, and this includes many of the professors as well that continue to push these types of thoughts and these ideologies. I had a lot of professors who knew I was on the team come up to me and say, oh, I'm so proud of your team, it's breaking history, and it's this magical, wonderful group of inclusion. And I would sit there and try not to scream back at them. And so it's really unfortunate. I know that there are some smaller schools now. I know Elon is kind of getting into the academic space, but especially at the Ivy Leagues, I don't know about some of these state institutions in redder states, but especially in the Ivy Leagues, and we've seen this at Harvard as well, a lot of the other schools, there is not a lot of hope, and we do have to push back and we have to be vocal, and I know that there are other groups working on this as well, so I'm excited to see how that goes down. I mean, I know it can be done, it's just not going to be easy.
So May, let's shift, we talked about different levers that can be used to push back. Paula talked about the advocacy part, the speaking out part. Let's move to the legal part. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the Independent Women's Law Center is approaching this and some of the things that you're working on?
Yeah, so from the government perspective, because like I said, Title IX is a massive law that affects our daily lives. Prison education programs are covered by Title IX. So when those rules come out, I can guarantee you we will be ready for a challenge. We've also written amicus briefs. We're also in court trying to define woman in contract. So for whatever reason, judges know how to read contracts like 99% of the time, but then they get to the word woman and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what it means. It's like, well, you read all the other parts of the contract, so I don't really understand what happened there. But so I think that there are other avenues I think that are sometimes difficult because they are at odds with our conservative principles and because big law has been totally taken over. So I had mentioned the LPGA, they removed their female at birth requirement in 2010. Well, they had a man who wanted to participate in the women's longest drive competition, which if anybody has driven the ball against their husband or whatever, like that's not gonna work if men can participate in longest drive competitions. But the man sued and the LPGA caved. On the other side, there are not women suing, minus there's a Connecticut case with the runners that are bringing their case. But there's money on the left, right? Big Law will bring this for free, the ACLU will bring this for free, all the NAACP will bring these cases for free, versus on the right, you don't have a stock of like hungry plaintiffs lawyers who are gonna do this for free. So I think it all goes back to the beginning that even if we're gonna play in the courts, we've gotta play in the education system, we've gotta develop lawyers, and this is like where the Federal Society comes in, but even before, even in undergrad, you have to have a stock of conservative litigators.
Amen.
I love that. I'm going to come back to you on messaging, but Michelle, let's talk a little bit about state activity. We mentioned the word WBOR, the acronym, that's Women's Bill of Rights. Believe it or not, women actually need a Bill of Rights, and IWF and IWV came up with this idea. Talk to us about just how the role of WBOR in states and what this means.
Sure. So we currently have Women's Bill of Rights inspired legislation passed in 4 states throughout the U.S. And essentially what that legislation does, as May will tell you, is it defines the word woman. So as it relates to all, state-related laws, it's on the books that this is what a woman is. And as we found in the case of the Kappa Gammas and the, Reagan-appointed judge, I think we're too close. The Reagan appointed judge, it's pretty important that we know and it's defined legally what a woman is. As it relates to how these laws are getting passed, I think there's 40,000 signatures thus far on the Women's Bill of Rights online, and one of our chapter leaders is an NCAA track champion. She worked hard to garner signatures from multiple alumni athletes. We have multiple alumni athletes and elite athletes that have signed on to this, which I think makes a big impact when we go to a state governing body where we can say, women are in support of this, and we can actually even segment down to the state level to say, these women in your state are in support of this. So no, you're not a transphobe if you sign on to this bill. So I think it makes a big impact. That end, in future states where we're working to get this passed, we've organized chapters to be prepared to stand up and testify and stand up and just speak on behalf of the Women's Bill of Rights when these bills are being brought to the floor. I think that makes a big impact too.
Nate, do you want to add on to anything? If not, I shift to another question for you. Okay, yeah, let's get to messaging. I loved you said we need to say sex more often. I'm a Christian woman, and I say sex, and I'm okay to say sex, and we should be embracing the term sex more than gender for good reason. Talk to us more about that, and also just general messaging on this issue.
Yeah, so I think I covered it, but
as I've seen in my Kappa Kappa Gamma case, the left has come in and said not only does woman not mean anything, woman could mean transgender woman, which could mean man, not so woman means man. But also, if you drill down and you look at the Title IX regs, you look at Title VII, you look at all these other things, sex and female don't mean anything either. And there are judges, federal judges, who have written large paragraphs saying sex incorporates all of these ideas about a person, their, including their gender identity. So when we say gender to mean sex, when we equate those two things, when you ask what the gender of my baby is, then we have, in a sense, allowed the left to conflate the terms too, right? So if we say sex and gender are the same thing, and then they say, I agree with you, sex and gender are the same thing, and because gender has this idea of women should be at home or women should wear pink, and it is fluid and societally determined, we've lost. We've given up the whole game. So sex and gender, no longer in our vocabulary. We can talk about whether it was right that it happened in the first place, right? But no longer can they mean the same thing. One other point on messaging, which I think conservatives are doing a bad job on. So everyone wants to be brave, okay. But we also have to be kind, and that's the thing, especially for women, right? I think it's a shame that the bathroom stuff happened first, because if you guys remember in North Carolina, there was an individual who wanted to use the bathroom. They had a separate stall that they could use. They didn't want to. They wanted to use the man's bathroom, even though this person was a woman, girl. And I think there was a lot of anger at this kid. Get out of my bathroom. And I think a lot of the times at the bathroom is like, they're gonna rape me. They're pedophiles. And some of them are, and some of them are gonna rape you. However, I don't think that messaging, that attack is the right one. And Abigail Schreier, who wrote Irreversible Damage, is pretty vocal on this, and she's, I think, formerly of the left. Instead, we have to be for something. And so I think being for parental rights is a good one, right? Shouldn't parents have the right to be able to raise their children and not have them infected in the schools with this social transitioning, which is what bathroom usage is. So you can be for parents, and that is a much stronger message. Or, as what happened in this North Carolina case, the kid was super sympathetic because this girl, who paraded as a boy, developed a lot of complications, allegedly because this girl didn't use the bathroom all day. Just held it in all day and got these UTIs and all this other stuff. And so you're just trying to bash on this kid who's now sort of dealing with medical complications. Well, probably those medical complications were from various surgeries and chemicals, right? Probably that was the case. And so if we can change our lens, the New York Times had a very recent piece against gender transitioning, whatever, gender ideology, so I know I just said gender, but whatever, sorry. But there's no such thing as a sex transition, you can't change your sex. So I think the New York Times actually did a much better job, and I would encourage people to read it, because it is very sympathetic to the parents who are being bashed by doctors saying, would you rather have an alive daughter or a dead son, So it's sympathetic to the parents who are going through this. It's sympathetic to the kids who are being bombarded with stuff on TikTok. So instead of, get out of my bathroom, you weirdo, I think we need to think about different ways to approach that, to be for somebody, to be for the parents, and to be for the kids. And that is going to be a much stronger message.
See if that works. Okay, I love this. So if we have questions, I would love to open the floor to questions. Carol, I think we'll work it the way that you worked your last panelist session. So yes, and folks, please feel free to join her and line up. We'd love to take some questions on this.
The question I have is for May. I know from my own research and my book, Countercultural Living, there's a chapter that talks about John Money. The Johns Hopkins doctor that came up with the concept of gender, and that was in the 1950s. And before that, there was no concept of gender. Why isn't that helpful to let people know that this was something invented, fairly recently?
It's funny, because like even Mike Pence will not use the word sex, he'll only use the word gender, and so we can shout from the rooftops, don't do this, but there's like a conservative politeness. So IWF does have a huge legal policy paper out about the origins of gender. Maybe it's boring? I don't know, but it is I don't know why people won't accept this, but now it's so seeped into our language that you have conservative all-stars who refuse to say the word sex. But Carol is exactly right. Gender and the use of gender and the ideas around gender are completely constructed and very new idea, and the only thing we can do is stop using the term.
My sense is that people have not grasped how recent that was, and so they don't realize that some professor sitting in an office came up with the concept, and if you could get that across, maybe we would have less people.
Yeah, and we're actually, in a way, sometimes battling the right on this issue in another way too. So for our Women's Bill of Rights, there are some groups that want to say everywhere you see, because unfortunately gender now appears everywhere. So you'll see in a state statute that your driver's license shall have your gender on there. But what it means is sex, right? They said gender to be nice, but what they meant is sex. So we have some people trying to do some legislative fixes saying everywhere you see gender, that means sex. No, don't say that, because now we're agreeing. You have to do the hard work. You have to do the hard work of going into the statute and deleting gender. We do not mean gender, we mean sex, rather than just saying these things shall work. So there's a huge re-education effort that needs to happen, because the left, they work quickly. I mean, they work very quickly.
Here we go. So we hear a lot about men entering women's sports, but in this quest to blur the lines between the sexes, do you guys anticipate or foresee, when it comes to professional sports and sports in NCAA, them so sissified the rules to ultimately make it to where women, the bar so low where women can compete in men's sports, if that question makes sense?
So the question I get, the question, can women participate in men's sports? I think they currently can. Again, we're battling some of the people on the right who don't, like, as men, they don't want to compete against women because, like, Christian-wise, they don't feel right about it, like beating up on a woman. But we, in state law, have really tried to push, it's okay for women to be in men's sports and it's not okay for men to be in women's sports, because a lot of times for women, if you want to be the kicker on the football team, like, why deny you that opportunity? So actually, I'm kind of in favor of women joining men's teams, or at least being able to have the opportunity to try out. And obviously there are safety considerations, and so women have to be very eyes wide open into that.
One thing that Riley talks about a lot, if you ever heard her speak in public, is I think in a lot of cases, biology takes over in those cases. We've all heard of the case of Leah Thomas, Bill Thomas, because he was successful. Now there was another competitor who was at that same competition, whose name is Isabel Hennig. She now goes by Isaac. And in that year, she competed in the women's division, and she placed, top 3 in the 100 free? Top 5 in the 100 free. And, she was an All-American swimmer. Well, the next year, she did so in her trunks with no top on. The next year, she switched to the men's team, and she proceeded to come in dead last in every single meet except for one, where a male swimmer with only one arm, she was able to succeed. So I think in a lot of cases, I mean, that is a pure case where we can see that this is truly an issue that impacts women. And it impacts women exclusively because women cannot physiologically compete at the same level as men. 14-year-old boys compete and their times beat Olympians in almost every single sport across the board. Like the top Olympians, the #1 finisher. So really, there is a physiological difference and it's blatantly obvious.
Yes. Thank you. I am a 25-year member of the DAR. That's Daughters of the American Revolution. Right before Christmas, they had their corporate meeting, and we all received a video from the head regent stating that if a transgender man, woman, whatever, applies for membership in your chapter, you have to accept them. So a group of ladies currently have pushed back on this and have gotten attorneys involved. And something that has been, I guess, talked about or whatever, is a DNA testing. Because it's evident that we are women and men. So the attorney said it is a women's organization. So what you need to do is you need to have blood tests to say. But I'm not sure what you all think, but it's being pushed down our organization. And a lot of people are leaving before it's even settled because corporate in Washington have made the decision to accept. It has not happened as far as I know, because I've been in it 25 years here in our county, Davidson.
Isn't it because it's based on, like some states will let you, because some,
Sorry.
We need to put that one away.
okay. So because some states will let you change your sex on your driver's license, that the DAR has historically gone by what's on your driver's license. I spoke at a DAR meeting earlier this fall, and the women were saying to me that, like, they were advised by their legal counsel that they would be, sued for discrimination if they didn't let the males in. We just did a piece on this too, didn't we, May?
Yeah, so there's a piece in the Federalist that was just laying this out, but this is obviously very similar to the Kappa Kappa Gamma case. So the defenses that DAR and Kappa will raise that are a little bit appetizing even to conservatives is you can't have courts policing everything in the bylaws. So if DAR or Kappa says, you shall be an upstanding woman, and someone smokes pot, and DAR says, that's fine, I don't care. Can you bring a lawsuit? You're not an upstanding woman, and the courts are kind of hesitant. They don't want to define all these terms. They don't want to define what it means to be upstanding. And I think that is a conservative principle to say that there is an autonomy and a First Amendment sort of expressive right to be able to define who's in your organization. So the problem really becomes, well, what about the word woman? Should that be treated like the word upstanding and we want the courts out? Or is that something where we want the courts in? And frankly, I think as conservatives, we don't want the courts in that either. We want people to just do the right thing. And yet these organizations can't because they're crippled in fear over lawsuits. But one final note on lawsuits. So there's a somewhat famous case about a beauty pageant in Oregon, the Miss United States of America pageant, and they have a natural-born female requirement. They were sued by a man who wanted into the beauty pageant, and the beauty pageant won, even though Oregon has a very tough, you shall not discriminate on the basis of all of the things, law. And what the court said, the Ninth Circuit liberal court said, was that the beauty pageant has a First Amendment right to express itself through its members. So its members are also, they don't have pregnant people, pregnant ladies competing, they don't have elderly people competing, they have young, non-married, non-pregnant, natural-born women, and that is their expression. And so that First Amendment right to expression was protected against Oregon's law of non-discrimination. So these groups need to not be scared of lawsuits. You are protected. You have a First Amendment right of protection, but it's expensive to defend yourself. So